At the family meeting about selling the company, I saw my son slip something into my wife's drink. When they were distracted, I subtly switched her glass with my daughter-in-law's. She drank it, and 10 minutes later, I could hardly believe what I witnessed. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. At 62 years old, I thought I knew my son. I thought I understood the man I had raised, the boy who used to climb onto my lap and ask me to read him bedtime stories. But sitting in that mahogany-paneled conference room on a gray Tuesday morning in October, watching Byron slip something into his mother's coffee cup, I realized I didn't know him at all. The meeting was supposed to be routine. After 38 years of building Hartwell Industries from nothing more than a two-man operation in a rented garage, Martha and I were finally ready to discuss succession planning. The company was worth nearly $12 million now, and we had called this family meeting to talk about Byron's gradual transition into leadership. Our lawyer, David Morrison, sat at one end of the long table, his briefcase open and documents spread neatly before him. Byron and his wife Cleo sat across from Martha and me, both looking appropriately serious for such an important discussion. I had been watching Byron carefully throughout the morning. Something about his demeanor felt off. He kept fidgeting with his phone, checking his watch, and exchanging meaningful glances with Cleo. When Martha excused herself to use the restroom, I saw my opportunity to address whatever was bothering him. "Son, is everything all right? You seem nervous." Byron forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just excited about the future, Dad? This is a big step for all of us." Cleo nodded enthusiastically, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. "We're just so grateful for this opportunity. You and Martha have built something incredible." There was something in her tone that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Cleo had always been charming, almost too charming. She had swept Byron off his feet 5 years ago at a charity gala, and within 6 months they were married. Martha had expressed concerns about how quickly things moved, but I had chalked it up to maternal protectiveness. When Martha returned with fresh coffee for everyone, she settled back into her chair with a soft sigh. "I'm sorry, where were we?" David shuffled through his papers. "We were about to discuss the ownership transfer timeline and the specific percentages." That's when I saw it. Byron's hand moved with practiced subtlety, reaching across the table as if to adjust some papers, but instead dropping something small and white into Martha's coffee cup. The movement was so quick, so natural, that if I hadn't been watching him directly, I would have missed it entirely. My heart stopped. For a moment I couldn't process what I had just witnessed. My own son, my flesh and blood, had just put something in his mother's drink. The rational part of my mind tried to find innocent explanations. Maybe it was sugar. Maybe it was medication she had asked him to help her with. But the secretive nature of it, the way he glanced around to make sure no one was watching, told me everything I needed to know. I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach, but I forced myself to remain calm. Years of business negotiations had taught me to keep my emotions in check, to think strategically even when my world was falling apart. Without drawing attention to myself, I reached for Martha's cup under the pretense of moving it away from some documents. "Let me just move this so we don't spill anything on these contracts," I said casually, sliding Martha's cup toward myself and simultaneously pushing my own untouched cup toward her. Martha smiled absently, her attention focused on David's explanation of tax implications. Byron's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched the cup switch, but he said nothing. Cleo continued taking notes, her expression unreadable. Minutes passed. David droned on about legal structures and fiduciary responsibilities. Martha sipped from what had originally been my cup while I left what had been hers completely untouched. Byron kept checking his watch, his leg bouncing under the table with increasing agitation. Then, exactly 10 minutes after the switch, Cleo's pen clattered to the floor. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, bending to retrieve it. But when she straightened up, her face had gone completely pale. She blinked several times as if trying to focus, and her hand went to her forehead. "Honey, are you feeling all right?" Byron asked. But there was something in his voice, not concern, but panic, pure, undiluted panic. Cleo tried to respond, but her words came out slurred. I feel... Her eyelids began to droop and she swayed in her chair. Byron jumped up so quickly that his chair toppled backward. Cleo! Cleo, what's wrong? But it was too late. Cleo's eyes rolled back and she slumped forward unconscious, her head hitting the table with a dull thud. The room erupted into chaos. Martha screamed. David fumbled for his phone to call 911, but I sat perfectly still, watching my son's face. I saw the exact moment when realization hit him, when he understood that his wife had consumed whatever he had intended for his mother. "Oh God," Byron whispered, his face draining of all color. "Oh God, she wasn't supposed to..." He caught himself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air like a confession. "Wasn't supposed to what, Byron?" I asked quietly, my voice cutting through Martha's panicked sobs and David's urgent phone conversation with the paramedics. Byron's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad, I can explain." "I'm sure you can." I stood up slowly, my joints protesting. After 62 years of life and 38 years of hard work building the company my son had just tried to steal from under my wife's nose. The question is whether I want to hear it. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. As they worked to stabilize Cleo, checking her vital signs and asking questions about what she might have ingested, I watched Byron fall apart piece by piece. His hand shook uncontrollably, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air conditioning, and he kept muttering under his breath, fragments of apologies and explanations that only served to confirm my worst fears. Martha clung to my arm, her coffee-scented breath warm against my ear as she whispered, "Abram, what's happening? What's wrong with Cleo?" I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what we were dealing with. But as I watched the paramedics load my unconscious daughter-in-law onto a stretcher, as I saw the guilt and terror written across my son's face, I knew that whatever was in that cup was meant to incapacitate my wife. The question that haunted me as we followed the ambulance to the hospital was simple and terrifying. What was Byron planning to do to Martha while she was unconscious? The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Martha sat beside me, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She kept asking questions I couldn't answer, or rather, questions I wasn't ready to answer. Not until I had the whole truth. Byron paced the length of the small waiting area like a caged animal. Every few minutes, he would stop and stare at the doors leading to the emergency department, then resume his frantic walking. His hair, usually perfectly styled for business meetings, stuck up in odd angles where he had run his hands through it. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were sweat stains under his arms despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "The doctor said she's stable," Martha said for the third time, as if repeating it would make the situation normal. "That's good news, right?" I squeezed her hand. "That's good news." But nothing about this was good. Nothing about watching my son slowly disintegrate in a hospital waiting room because his wife had accidentally consumed whatever poison he had intended for his mother could possibly be considered good news. Dr. Rebecca Chen emerged from the emergency department just after 2 in the afternoon. She was young, probably in her early 30s, with tired eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. She approached us with the practiced calm of someone who delivered difficult news on a daily basis. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been treating your daughter-in-law." Byron stopped pacing and rushed toward her. "Is she going to be okay? Will there be any permanent damage? Can I see her?" Dr. Chen held up a hand to slow his barrage of questions. "Mrs. Hartwell is stable and conscious now. The good news is that we don't expect any lasting effects from what she ingested." "What exactly did she ingest?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Dr. Chen consulted her clipboard. "The toxicology report shows a significant amount of benzodiazepine in her system, specifically a combination of lorazepam and zolpidem. It's not a lethal combination, but it would have rendered someone unconscious for several hours and likely left them with significant memory gaps." Martha gasped. "Memory gaps? You mean she wouldn't remember what happened while she was unconscious?" "That's correct. It's actually a combination that's sometimes used in..." Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. In situations where someone wants to incapacitate another person temporarily without causing permanent harm. The implications hung heavy in the sterile air. Byron had gone completely pale, and I could see him struggling not to vomit. Martha looked confused, not yet connecting the dots that were so painfully clear to me. "Can we see her?" I asked. "Family members only, and only 2 at a time. She's still groggy, but she should be fully alert within the next hour or 2. Byron stepped forward eagerly. "I'll go first. She's my wife. I should—" "Actually," I interrupted, placing a firm hand on Byron's shoulder, "I think Martha and I should see her first. You look like you could use some fresh air, son." It wasn't a suggestion, and Byron understood that. His jaw clenched, but he nodded reluctantly. "I'll be in the parking lot, making some calls." As Martha and I followed Dr. Chen down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Byron through the window. He wasn't making calls. He was leaning against his BMW, his head in his hands, looking like a man whose entire world was collapsing around him. Cleo was awake but disoriented when we entered her room. Her usually perfect makeup was smeared, and her blonde hair was matted against the hospital pillow. She looked younger somehow, vulnerable, in a way I had never seen her before. "Abram? Martha?" Her voice was hoarse, confused. "What happened?" "Byron said I collapsed during the meeting, but I don't remember anything after." She frowned, struggling to piece together her memories. "What do you remember, dear?" Martha asked gently, settling into the chair beside Cleo's bed. "We were talking about the company transfer. David was explaining something about tax structures, and then Cleo's frown deepened. I remember feeling dizzy suddenly, and then nothing until I woke up here." I exchanged a look with Martha, who was beginning to understand that something was terribly wrong. "Cleo, did you eat or drink anything unusual today, before the meeting?" "No, just coffee. Byron brought me a cup from that little cafe down the street from the office. And then I had more coffee during the meeting." She trailed off, her eyes widening as a thought occurred to her. "Wait, why are you asking me this? Do you think someone—" "I think," I said carefully, "that you accidentally consumed something that was meant for someone else." Cleo stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Who was it meant for?" Before I could answer, Byron burst through the door. His face was flushed, and he was breathing heavily, as if he had run up several flights of stairs. "How are you feeling, honey?" he asked, rushing to Cleo's bedside. But his eyes weren't on his wife, they were on me, watching my reaction, trying to gauge how much I knew. "I'm confused, Byron," Cleo said slowly. "Abram was just explaining that I might have consumed something that was meant for someone else." Byron's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: panic, guilt, and finally, a desperate attempt at innocence. "That's ridiculous. Who would put something in someone's drink? That's crazy talk." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "Because Dr. Chen just told us that Cleo consumed a combination of drugs that would render someone unconscious for hours with significant memory loss. That seems like a very specific accident." Byron's hands were shaking now. He gripped the metal rail of Cleo's hospital bed so tightly that his knuckles were white. "Dad, you can't seriously think that anyone would—" "Byron!" Cleo's voice cut through his stammering. She was staring at her husband with growing horror. "Byron, tell me I didn't do anything." The words exploded out of him with such force that Martha jumped. "This is all just a terrible misunderstanding." But Cleo wasn't buying it anymore. I could see the pieces clicking together in her mind, the nervous energy Byron had displayed all morning, his constant watch-checking, the meaningful looks between them that I had interpreted as excitement, but now realized had been coordination. "You were going to drug Martha," Cleo whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "During the meeting about the company transfer, you were going to knock her unconscious." Byron's facade finally cracked completely. "It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. It was just, she was never going to agree to sign the papers giving me full power of attorney. You know how stubborn she is about maintaining control. I just needed her out of the way for a few hours so we could—" He stopped, realizing that he had just confessed to attempted drugging in front of 3 witnesses. But the damage was done. Martha's face had gone completely white. "So you could what, Byron? What were you planning to do while I was unconscious?" Byron looked around the room desperately, like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. "Mom, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. I was just trying to secure our family's future. The company transfer documents were already prepared, and I just needed—" "You needed to render your mother unconscious so you could manipulate her into signing away her rights to the company she helped build," I finished for him, my voice deadly calm. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the normal hospital sounds, the beeping of machines, the chatter of nurses in the hallway, seemed muted by the weight of Byron's betrayal. Finally, Cleo spoke, her voice small and broken. "How long have you been planning this?" Byron couldn't meet her eyes. That was answer enough. The drive home from the hospital was the longest 23 minutes of my life. Martha sat beside me in complete silence, staring out the passenger window at the passing autumn landscape. Her hands were folded in her lap, but I could see the slight tremor in her fingers that she was trying so hard to hide. In 41 years of marriage, I had seen Martha angry, sad, frustrated, and disappointed, but I had never seen her look so utterly broken. Byron and Cleo had stayed at the hospital. Cleo needed a few more hours of observation, and honestly, I wasn't ready to face my son again. Not yet. Not until I had time to process what had just happened and figure out what came next. When we finally pulled into our driveway, Martha spoke for the first time since leaving the hospital. "He was going to drug me, Abram. Our son was going to knock me unconscious so he could steal our company." I turned off the engine and sat in the growing darkness of our garage. "I know. How long do you think he's been planning this?" That was the question that had been eating at me for hours. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I intend to find out." Inside our house, everything looked exactly the same as it had when we left that morning, but somehow it felt different. The family photos on the mantelpiece, Byron's high school graduation, his wedding day, Christmas mornings filled with laughter, they all seemed like relics from someone else's life now. How do you look at pictures of your child and reconcile them with someone who would drug his own mother? Martha headed straight upstairs, claiming she needed a shower, but I knew she really needed time alone to cry. I could hear the water running and then, faintly, the sound of sobbing that she thought the shower would mask. I went to my study and locked the door behind me. If Byron had been planning this for months, there would be evidence, financial records, legal documents, something that would show the scope of his betrayal. I pulled out the files related to our succession planning and began going through them methodically. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, Byron had requested copies of all corporate documents, claiming he wanted to familiarize himself with the business structure before taking over. I had been proud of his initiative. Now I realized it had been reconnaissance. 6 weeks ago, he had asked for access to our company's financial records, saying he wanted to understand our cash flow and investment strategies. Again, I had seen it as responsible preparation for leadership. But buried in my email, I found correspondence between Byron and our accountant, James Mitchell, that I had never been copied on. Byron had been asking detailed questions about the company's liquid assets, about how quickly properties could be liquidated, about the process for transferring ownership stakes. My hands were shaking as I called James at home. "Abram, good evening. I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. How did the family meeting go?" "James, I need you to tell me about the conversations you've been having with Byron over the past few months." There was a pause. "What conversations specifically?" "Don't play dumb with me, James. I found the emails. I know he's been asking you about liquidating assets and ownership transfers." Another pause, longer this time. "Abram, Byron told me you had asked him to handle those inquiries. He said you were testing his business acumen as part of the succession planning." My stomach dropped. "James, I never asked Byron to make those inquiries. I've been copied on every piece of correspondence related to succession planning except those emails." "Oh, God." James's voice was barely a whisper. "Abram, there's more. Byron asked me to prepare preliminary paperwork for transferring controlling interest of the company to him. He said it was just a draft, that you wanted to see what it would look like. The documents are already drawn up." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of my son's betrayal settle fully on my shoulders. What kind of controlling interest? 85%. He said you and Martha wanted to retain 15% for sentimental reasons, but that you wanted him to have full operational control. 85%. My son hadn't just been planning to incapacitate his mother to steal part of our company. He had been planning to take virtually everything. James, I need you to cancel any work you've done on those documents. And I need you to prepare a full report of every conversation and request Byron has made over the past 6 months. Of course, Abram, I'm so sorry. If I had known, you couldn't have known. Byron lied to both of us. After I hung up with James, I sat in my study staring at the wall. The family photos on my desk, Byron as a toddler, learning to ride a bike, starting his first day of college, seemed to mock me. When had the sweet little boy who used to help me in the garage workshop turned into someone capable of this level of deception and betrayal? My phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. Byron's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. What do you want, Byron? Dad? Please, let me explain. I know what happened today looks bad, but looks bad? My voice was dangerously quiet. Byron, you attempted to drug your mother. You've been lying to our accountant for months. You've been planning to steal our company out from under us. Silence on the other end of the line. I know about the ownership transfer documents, son. I know about the 85% controlling interest you were planning to take. I know about all of it. When Byron finally spoke, his voice was different. Gone was the panicked, guilty tone from the hospital. Now he sounded cold, calculating. Dad, you don't understand the position you're in. The company has been struggling more than you realize. There are debts you don't know about, obligations that need to be met. I was trying to save the family business. What debts, Byron? I review our financial statements every month. The statements you see, yes, but there are other commitments. Investments I made on behalf of the company that haven't panned out. Loans I took against future earnings. My hand tightened around the phone. What are you talking about? I'm talking about $800,000 in obligations that need to be met in the next 90 days, Dad. I'm talking about saving Hartwell Industries from bankruptcy. The number hit me like a physical blow. $800,000. We didn't have that kind of liquid capital without selling major assets. We took out loans against the company without my authorization. I had to. There was an opportunity for a major expansion into the Southeast market. I couldn't wait for board approval. The window was closing. What expansion? What opportunity? Byron, I haven't seen any documentation about Southeast expansion. Another pause. Because it didn't work out, Dad. The deal fell through, but the loans are still due. I felt like I was falling down a dark tunnel. Not only had my son tried to drug his mother to steal our company, but he had apparently already stolen from us to the tune of $800,000. Where is the money, Byron? Gone, invested in partnerships that dissolved, properties that couldn't be developed, contracts that fell through. You gambled away $800,000 of our money? I made business decisions that didn't pan out. It happens, Dad. That's why I needed to take control of the company officially, so I could make the hard choices necessary to save it. The audacity was breathtaking. My son had stolen nearly $1 million from our company, lost it all, and then planned to drug his mother so he could gain legal control of what was left. Byron, I said slowly, you are never getting control of this company. Not now, not ever. Dad, you need to think about this rationally. Without my plan, Hartwell Industries goes under in 3 months. Mom loses everything. You lose everything. I'm offering you a way to save at least something by letting you steal it legally instead of illegally, by letting me fix the mess I created. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark silence of my study. Upstairs, I could hear Martha moving around in our bedroom, probably getting ready for bed, probably hoping that sleep would provide some escape from the nightmare our family had become. But there would be no escape. Not tonight, and probably not for a long time to come. Because now I knew the full scope of Byron's betrayal, and I realized that today's attempted drugging hadn't been the beginning of his plan. It had been the final step in a scheme that had been months in the making. My son hadn't just tried to steal our company today. He had already been stealing from us for months, bleeding us dry while planning to convince us to hand over what remained. And tomorrow, I was going to have to tell Martha that our financial situation was much worse than we had ever imagined. Martha didn't sleep that night, and neither did I. We lay in our king-sized bed, both pretending to be asleep, both knowing that the other was staring at the ceiling in the darkness. At some point around 3 in the morning, she reached over and took my hand. "How bad is it, Abram?" she whispered. I squeezed her fingers. "Bad. Tell me." So I did. I told her about the $800,000 in unauthorized loans, about Byron's failed business ventures, about the documents he had prepared to steal 85% of our company. I told her everything except the part I was still trying to process myself, that our son had become someone capable of drugging his own mother to cover up his theft. When I finished, Martha was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We need to know everything, all of it, before we decide what to do." She was right. We needed a complete picture of Byron's betrayal before we could figure out how to protect ourselves and what was left of our company. The next morning, I made a series of phone calls that I never thought I would need to make. The first was to Patricia Valdez, a private investigator who had done some work for our company in the past, looking into potential business partners and conducting background checks on key employees. "Patricia, I need your help with something personal and sensitive." "Of course, Mr. Hartwell. What can I do for you?" "I need you to investigate my son." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Patricia had met Byron several times over the years. She knew this wasn't a request I was making lightly. "What am I looking for?" "Financial irregularities, undisclosed debts, gambling, business partnerships we don't know about. Anything that might explain how $800,000 disappeared from our company accounts. I'll need access to financial records and authorization to contact banks and creditors. You'll have whatever you need." My second call was to Michael Harrison, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. I had hoped never to need his services, but here we were. "Michael, I need to understand my legal options regarding embezzlement by a family member." "Abram, what's going on?" I gave him the abbreviated version, the attempted drugging, the unauthorized loans, the forged documentation. When I finished, Michael was quiet for a long moment. "How much money are we talking about?" "At least $800,000, possibly more." "And you have documentation of the unauthorized transactions?" "I'm gathering it now." "Abram, I need to be very clear with you about something. If Byron has been forging your signature on loan documents or financial instruments, that's not just embezzlement, that's fraud. And if he attempted to drug Martha to force her to sign documents, that could be considered assault and attempted kidnapping, depending on how the prosecutor wants to handle it." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My son wasn't just a thief. He was potentially a felon facing serious prison time. "Michael, what are my options?" "Legally, you have several paths. You can file criminal charges, pursue civil recovery, or try to handle this privately within the family. But Abram, you need to understand, if Byron is desperate enough to drug his own mother, he may be desperate enough to do other things. You need to protect yourself and Martha." After hanging up with Michael, I sat in my study and tried to process the fact that I was now investigating my own son as a criminal. Martha brought me coffee and sat down across from my desk. "What did the lawyer say?" "He said we need to be careful. Byron might be more dangerous than we realized." Martha's face went pale. "Dangerous? How?" "Someone willing to drug his mother to steal from her might be willing to do other things to cover his tracks." We spent the rest of the morning going through our financial records with a fine-tooth comb. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Byron hadn't just taken one large loan. He had been systematically bleeding money from our company for almost a year. There were consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist, equipment purchases that were never delivered, service contracts with vendors who had no record of working with us. Byron had been creating fake expenses and pocketing the money, probably hoping that by the time anyone noticed, he would be in control of the company and could cover it up. The total amount was staggering. Over $1.2 million had disappeared from our accounts over the past 11 months. "Martha," I said, staring at the spreadsheet we had created, "we're not just looking at theft. We're looking at systematic embezzlement over nearly a year." Martha put her head in her hands. "How did we miss this? Because we trusted him. Because he's our son and we never thought to question his motives when he offered to help with the financial management." Patricia called that afternoon with her preliminary findings. "Mr. Hartwell, I've traced some of Byron's financial activity over the past year. It's not good news." "Tell me." "He has significant gambling debts. At least $300,000 that I can document, possibly more. He's been borrowing against the company's credit lines to pay off bookmakers and casino debts." My stomach dropped. "Gambling debts? Byron doesn't gamble. According to the records I've found, he's been making regular trips to Atlantic City and Las Vegas. Large cash advances on corporate credit cards, wire transfers to offshore gaming sites, payments to individuals who appear to be loan sharks." "Loan sharks?" "Mr. Hartwell, your son owes money to some very dangerous people, the kind of people who don't accept excuses for late payments." Suddenly, Byron's desperation made perfect sense. He hadn't just been stealing from us to fund failed business ventures. He had been stealing to pay off gambling debts to criminals who would hurt him if he didn't pay up. "Patricia, how much danger is he in?" "Based on what I'm seeing, substantial danger. These aren't the kind of debts you can discharge in bankruptcy or negotiate away. If he doesn't pay, they'll hurt him. And if they can't get to him, they might go after his family." "His family? You mean Cleo?" "I mean anyone connected to him, wife, parents, anyone who might have access to money." I felt a chill run down my spine. Byron hadn't just been planning to steal from us, he had been planning to sacrifice us to save his own life. "Patricia, I need you to find out everything. How much he owes, to whom, and what kind of timeline we're looking at." "I'm on it. But Mr. Hartwell, you need to consider involving law enforcement. If Byron owes money to organized crime, this is beyond what a private investigator can handle." After I hung up, I called Martha into my study and told her what Patricia had found. "Gambling debts?" Martha's voice was barely a whisper. "To criminals?" "It explains everything, Martha. The desperation, the willingness to drug you, the systematic theft over almost a year. He's not just greedy, he's terrified. But that doesn't excuse what he did to us. No, it doesn't. But it helps explain why he was willing to destroy his own family to save himself." That evening, Byron called again. This time, his voice was different. Not cold and calculating like the night before, but panicked and pleading. "Dad, I need to see you. Tonight. It's urgent." "I'm not ready to see you, Byron." "Dad, please. There are things you don't understand. Complications. I'm in trouble, and it's bigger than just the company money. I know about the gambling debts, son. Silence on the other end of the line. You know? I know about the bookmakers, the loan sharks, the trips to Atlantic City. I know about all of it. Then you understand why I had to do what I did. Dad, these people don't negotiate. They don't give extensions. If I don't pay them back in the next 30 days, they're going to kill me. And your solution was to drug your mother and steal our life's work? My solution was to save the family business and use the proceeds to pay off my debts. Everyone would have been protected. Everyone except your mother, who would have been unconscious and robbed. She wouldn't have been hurt, Dad. The drugs were just to make sure she didn't interfere with the signing. She would have woken up a few hours later with control of 15% of a company that was saved from bankruptcy. The casual way he discussed drugging his mother was almost more disturbing than the act itself. Byron, you're not getting control of this company. Not now, not ever. Find another way to pay your debts. There is no other way. Dad, please, these people will kill me, and if they can't get their money from me, they'll come after you and Mom. You're in danger now, too." The line went dead. I sat holding the phone, realizing that our nightmare was far from over. Byron had tried to save himself by sacrificing us. Now that his plan had failed, we were all in danger from the criminals he owed money to. And somewhere out there, my desperate, gambling-addicted son was probably planning his next move. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound outside our house, a car door slamming, footsteps on the sidewalk, the neighbor's dog barking, made me jump. Martha and I had installed a security system years ago, but it suddenly felt inadequate against the kind of people Byron owed money to. At dawn, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. I called Michael Harrison, our attorney, and told him I wanted to press criminal charges against my own son. Are you sure about this, Abram? Once we file, there's no taking it back. Byron will be arrested. He threatened us, Michael. He said these loan sharks would come after Martha and me if he couldn't pay. My son has put our lives in danger to cover up his own criminal behavior. I understand. I'll prepare the paperwork and coordinate with the district attorney's office. But Abram, you need to know that Byron will probably try to negotiate. He might offer information about his gambling associates in exchange for a reduced sentence. That's fine, as long as he can't hurt us anymore. Patricia called an hour later with more disturbing news. Mr. Hartwell, I've identified at least 3 different criminal organizations that Byron owes money to. The total debt is closer to $1.8 million, not the $1.2 million you found in your books. Aka, $1.8 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. Where did the additional $600,000 come from? Interest and penalties. When you borrow from loan sharks and can't pay on time, the debt grows exponentially. According to my sources, Byron's been making minimum payments to keep them from breaking his legs, but he's been falling further behind every month. How much time does he have before they take more serious action? Based on what I'm hearing, maybe 2 weeks, probably less. I hung up and went to find Martha. She was in the kitchen, sitting at our breakfast table, with an untouched cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. She looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. We need to leave town for a while, I said without preamble. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. Because of Byron's debts? Because of the danger those debts put us in. Martha, these people don't care that we're innocent. They only care about getting their money, and if they think we have access to it, they'll hurt us. She finished the thought I couldn't bring myself to voice. Patricia thinks we have maybe 2 weeks before things escalate. I've already called Michael to press charges against Byron, but that won't protect us from his creditors. Martha nodded slowly. Where do we go? Your sister's place in Denver, at least temporarily. Colorado's far enough away to give us some breathing room while we figure out our next steps. And the company? That was the question I had been dreading. I don't know yet. We might have to liquidate everything to protect ourselves. We were packing when Byron showed up at our front door. I saw him through the bedroom window, pacing on our front porch like a caged animal. He looked terrible, unshaven, his expensive clothes wrinkled and stained, his hair greasy and unkempt. He had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Martha came to the window and stood beside me. Should we let him in? No, not after what he threatened last night. But Byron wasn't waiting for permission. I heard the sound of breaking glass from downstairs. He had thrown something through our kitchen window and climbed inside. Dad, Mom, I know you're here. We need to talk. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in our bedroom closet and told Martha to lock herself in our bathroom and call 911. Then I went downstairs to face my son. Byron was standing in our living room, surrounded by the family photos that now seemed like artifacts from a different life. Up close, he looked even worse than he had from the window. His hands were shaking, his eyes were bloodshot, and there were bruises on his knuckles that hadn't been there a few days ago. Dad, thank God. We don't have much time. Byron, you broke into our house. I'm calling the police. No, don't. Dad, please, just listen to me. They came to see me last night. Who came to see you? Tony Marconi's people. Dad, these aren't just bookmakers. Tony Marconi runs half the illegal gambling in the Northeast. I owe him $800,000, and he's done waiting. I felt my grip tighten on the baseball bat. What did they want? They want their money by Friday, or they start collecting from family members. Dad, they know where you live. They know where Mom shops, what car she drives, what time you usually get home from work. And whose fault is that, Byron? Mine. It's all my fault, I know that. But fault doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that they're going to hurt you and Mom if I don't pay them. Then you better figure out how to pay them without stealing from us. Byron laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, I've tried everything. I've sold my house, my car, everything I own. I've borrowed against my life insurance, maxed out every credit card I could get. There's nothing left except the company. The company isn't yours to sell. It could be. Dad, I still have the ownership transfer documents. All you and Mom have to do is sign them, and I can liquidate enough assets to pay off Marconi and still leave you with a decent retirement fund. Byron, we're not signing anything. We're pressing criminal charges against you for embezzlement and fraud. The color drained from Byron's face. You're what? You heard me. You're going to jail, son. The only question is, for how long? Dad, you can't. If I get arrested, I can't pay Marconi. And if I can't pay Marconi, that's not our problem anymore. Byron stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The desperate pleading was replaced by something colder, more calculating. Something that reminded me of the way he had looked when he slipped that drug into his mother's coffee. Actually, Dad, it is your problem, because I've already told Marconi's people that you and Mom are partners in the business. I told them you knew about the loans and approved them. My blood turned to ice. You did what? I had to give them some assurance that the debt would be paid. So I told them that the loans were a family decision, and that if something happened to me, you and Mom would honor the commitment. I felt the world tilting around me. Byron, you made us accomplices to your gambling debts without our knowledge. I made you responsible for them, which means if I go to jail and can't pay, they're going to come after you for the full amount. You son of a bitch. Dad, I'm trying to save all of us. Sign the transfer documents. Let me sell enough company assets to pay off the debt, and we all walk away from this alive. And if we don't? Byron's expression grew even colder. Then you better hope Marconi's people believe you when you tell them you had nothing to do with the loans. I raised the baseball bat slightly. Get out of our house, Byron. Dad, please. I'm begging you. Sign the papers and this all goes away. Get out. Byron looked at me for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the broken kitchen window he had climbed through. Just before he reached it, he turned back. Dad, I'm sorry it came to this, I really am. But if you don't help me, we're all going to pay the price. After he left, I went upstairs to check on Martha. She was still locked in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with her back against the door. Is he gone? Yes, but Martha, we need to leave. Now. Today. I told her about Byron's threat, about how he had made us responsible for his gambling debts without our knowledge. By the time I finished, she was crying, not the quiet tears she had been shedding for days, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. He's really going to let them hurt us, she whispered. Our own son is going to let criminals hurt us to save himself. Not if I can help it. I called Michael Harrison and explained the new threat. His advice was blunt and terrifying. Abram, you need federal protection. If Byron has really made you guarantors of his debt to organized crime figures, your lives are in immediate danger. I'm calling the FBI. Within 2 hours, our house was swarming with federal agents. Special Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to the doctor who had treated Cleo, was a serious woman in her 40s who had clearly dealt with organized crime cases before. Mr. Hartwell, we're going to offer you and your wife protective custody while we investigate your son's claims and assess the threat level. What about Byron? We'll pick him up for questioning. If he's been making false representations to criminal organizations about your involvement in his debts, that's a federal crime in itself. As Martha and I packed bags for what might be a very long stay in protective custody, I found myself thinking about the family photos scattered throughout our house. 41 years of marriage, 38 years of building a business, 35 years of raising a son who had ultimately tried to destroy us to save himself. Are you ready? Martha asked from the doorway. I looked around our bedroom one last time, at the life we might never be able to return to because our own son had chosen to sacrifice us rather than face the consequences of his actions. As ready as I'll ever be. Ours. But as we walked downstairs to meet the federal agents who would take us into hiding, I realized that, ready or not, the final confrontation with Byron was still ahead of us. 3 months later, Martha and I sat in a federal courthouse in Philadelphia, watching our son being sentenced for multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and racketeering. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly seen enough white-collar crime to be thoroughly unimpressed by Byron's tears and pleas for mercy. Mr. Hartwell, Judge Patricia Morrison said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade, your crimes were not crimes of passion or desperation. They were calculated, premeditated acts that endangered not only your victims, but your own family members. The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 5 years. Byron's shoulders shook as the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs. He looked back at Martha and me one final time, his face a mixture of regret and desperation. But neither of us made any move to comfort him. That time had passed. The FBI had been thorough in their investigation. They discovered that Byron had indeed told multiple criminal organizations that Martha and I were partners in his gambling ventures, making us targets for collection efforts. But they also discovered something else. Byron had been recording his conversations with these criminals, apparently planning to use the recordings as insurance if they ever threatened him directly. Those recordings had been enough to bring down 2 major gambling operations and put several dangerous people behind bars. In exchange for his cooperation, Byron's sentence had been reduced from the 15 years he could have received to the 8 years he ultimately got. But the recordings had also captured Byron's own voice, clearly stating that his parents knew nothing about his gambling debts and that he was lying to the criminals about our involvement. Those admissions had ultimately saved our lives and our freedom. Special Agent Chen approached us as we left the courthouse. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to let you know that the threat assessment has been completed. With the arrests we've made based on Byron's recordings, you're no longer considered to be in immediate danger. You can return to your normal lives." "Thank you, Agent Chen, for everything. I'm sorry it had to come to this. I know this couldn't have been easy." He was right. It hadn't been easy. Watching your own child be sentenced to federal prison never is. But as Martha and I walked out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Our company, Hartwell Industries, had survived Byron's theft, though not without significant damage. We had been forced to sell several properties and liquidate some investments to cover the money he had stolen. But the core business remained intact. More importantly, we had discovered that our employees, the people who had worked beside us for years, were more loyal and capable than we had ever imagined. James Mitchell, our accountant, had been devastated when he learned how Byron had manipulated him, but he had worked tirelessly to help us untangle the financial mess. Sarah Rodriguez, our operations manager, had stepped up to handle day-to-day management while we dealt with the legal proceedings. Tom Bradley, our longest-serving employee, had actually offered to take out a personal loan to help the company through its cash flow crisis. These people, not our son, were our real family. A week after the sentencing, Martha and I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. We called a meeting with our key employees and made them an offer. "We're retiring," I announced to the group assembled in our conference room, the same room where Byron had tried to drug his mother. "But we're not selling the company to strangers. We're selling it to you." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Sarah Rodriguez raised her hand tentatively. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm not sure we understand. Are you talking about selling shares to employees?" "I'm talking about selling the entire company to the people who actually make it run. You've proven over the past few months that Hartwell Industries doesn't need the Hartwell family to succeed. It needs good people who care about the work and the customers." Martha leaned forward. "We've spoken with our attorneys and accountants. We can structure this as an employee stock ownership plan. You'll buy the company over time using profits from operations. No one will be forced to participate, but everyone who wants to be an owner can become one." Tom Bradley, who had been with us since the beginning, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Mr. Hartwell, after everything your family has been through, why would you trust us with this?" "Because you've already proven we can trust you. When Byron was stealing from us, you were working honestly. When criminals threatened us, you kept the company running. You didn't choose us as family, but you've acted like family when it mattered most." Lo, the employee buyout took 3 months to finalize, but it was the most satisfying business transaction I had ever been part of. Instead of selling our life's work to corporate raiders who would strip it for parts, we were passing it on to people who understood its value and would preserve what Martha and I had built. On our last day as owners of Hartwell Industries, the employees threw us a retirement party in the same conference room where our nightmare had begun. There were speeches, gifts, and more tears than I had expected from a room full of tough construction industry veterans. But the moment I will never forget came when Sarah Rodriguez pulled Martha and me aside and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to know that we're going to take care of this place. We're going to make sure that 30 years from now, people will still remember that you built something good here." With the money from the sale, Martha and I were able to pay off all of Byron's gambling debts, not because we felt obligated to, but because we wanted to close that chapter of our lives completely. We also set aside enough money to ensure that Byron would have something to start over with when he was released from prison, though we made it clear that any relationship with him would have to be rebuilt from scratch. The rest of the money we invested in a trust that would support programs for people dealing with gambling addiction and families affected by white-collar crime. It seemed like a fitting way to turn something destructive into something helpful. 6 months after Byron's sentencing, Martha and I bought a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, far from the memories and associations of our old life. The house came with 2 acres of land, enough space for Martha to have the garden she had always wanted, and for me to have a workshop where I could build furniture as a hobby instead of a business. On warm evenings, we sit on our back porch and watch the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sometimes we talk about Byron, wondering how he's doing in prison, whether he's getting the help he needs for his gambling addiction, whether there's any chance of reconciliation when he's released. Most of the time, though, we talk about the future, the trips we want to take, the books we want to read, the simple pleasure of waking up each day without wondering what crisis our son has created. I won't pretend that losing Byron hasn't left scars. There are still nights when Martha wakes up from dreams about that day in the conference room. Still moments when we both wonder what we could have done differently to prevent our son from becoming someone capable of such betrayal. But we've also learned something valuable. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you when everything falls apart, who work to build something good instead of tearing it down, who choose loyalty and honesty even when it's difficult. We found that kind of family in our employees. We found it in Agent Chen and the other FBI personnel who protected us. We found it in Michael Harrison and Patricia Valdez and all the other professionals who helped us navigate the worst crisis of our lives. And most importantly, we found it in each other. 41 years of marriage had prepared us for a lot of things, but not for discovering that our only child was willing to destroy us to save himself. The fact that we came through it together, that we supported each other instead of turning on each other, that we made decisions based on shared values rather than individual survival, that's what real family looks like. Last week, I received a letter from Byron. It was the first communication we had received from him since his sentencing. The letter was short, written on prison stationery, in handwriting that looked older somehow, more careful. "Dad and Mom," it read, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know that what I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know that I understand now what I destroyed. And I'm sorry. I'm getting help for my gambling problem, and I'm trying to become someone you could be proud of again someday. I love you both, even though I know my actions proved otherwise. Byron." Martha and I talked about the letter for hours. We haven't decided whether to respond, whether to visit him, whether to begin the long process of trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. But we have decided one thing. We're not going to let Byron's choices define the rest of our lives. We survived his betrayal, we protected ourselves and our legacy, and we found a way to turn something terrible into something positive. Now we're focused on the future, on the life we're building together in the mountains of North Carolina, far from the conference rooms and corporate lawyers and federal agents who dominated so many months of our lives. Some stories don't have happy endings, but they can have peaceful ones. And sometimes, when you've lived through the worst thing you can imagine, peace is more valuable than happiness. As I finish writing this account, Martha calls to me from the kitchen. She's making her famous apple pie, and she needs help peeling apples. It's a simple thing, a domestic thing, the kind of ordinary moment that we almost lost because our son valued money more than family, but we didn't lose it. We're here, we're safe, and we're free. And that, I've learned, is victory enough.